Welcome to the Madness and Grace podcast, where we explore the connection between mental health and faith. I'm Dr. Matthew Stanford, neuroscientist, author, and mental health advocate.
And I'm Dr. Madeline Stiers, therapist and trauma researcher. We're so glad you're joining us today. Each week, we have authentic conversations about personal stories, we share professional insights, and explore the meaningful ways faith can influence mental well-being.
Whether you're seeking comfort, understanding, or simply a new perspective, we're here to journey with you. Thanks for tuning in. Now let's dive into today's conversation. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Madness and Grace podcast. We've been gone for a little while, but we have things up and running again. So today we have a great topic. We're going to be talking about mental health and ministry leaders, specifically burnout in ministry leaders. A really kind of important and relevant topic, but a topic I think everybody can connect with, whether you're a ministry leader or not. So, Maddie, you want to kind of kick us off a little bit, maybe tell a little bit about what burnout is from a clinical perspective?
Well, I think it's a term that we hear a lot now. It's a buzzword, right? Like burnout, what is burnout? And we talk about self-care as well. But I mean, burnout is really something experienced by people just across the world, right? In different fields, and especially in the helping profession. But burnout really is, when we tend to neglect our own needs and what ways we can care for ourselves, especially when we're in helping profession. So working in a church, working in social services, things along those lines. We're giving so much in the work that we do. I mean, we find purpose in that, but we fail to take care of ourselves. And that leads to kind of chronic fatigue, chronic tiredness, maybe being a little bit more irritable. You tend to lose the joy and satisfaction maybe that you actually used to feel in work. Getting up and getting to the office or getting to those meetings becomes burdensome. And it really just takes a toll on you physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, in all kind of different areas. That's typically what burnout is when people are talking about hitting that wall.
Absolutely. And, I think it's important that people recognize this. This is more than just not liking your job. And it's more than, I had a bad day. This is something that is progressive over time. It builds up over time. And it can have certain precipitating factors. For instance, if you have a very heavy workload, you don't feel like you have a lot of support, you don't have opportunities to take breaks, things like that. And I think ministry work or church work really is kind of a perfect storm for burnout. And research does show that ministry leaders will often experience burnout at higher rates than other professional groups. And, part of the problem there is just that, as you mentioned, this tremendous emotional demand. Because, one minute you're just kind of running a business, you're dealing with, ordering copy paper and things like that. The next minute you're dealing with a family that's falling apart or a death of a loved one. I mean, it can be pretty intense. And then also constant availability. Pastor's job is 24/7, 365. And there's a lot of other factors that go into that. Now, you mentioned self-care. I think a lot of times people think of, particularly when they're in helping professions, but maybe even more specifically when they're in ministry, that, I'm thinking about others, I'm not thinking about myself. It would be selfish of me to focus on trying to make myself better, help me be better, worry about mine. These people that come to me are very stressed out. Could you speak a little bit to this idea of self-care? What does that look like? I mean, it sounds very touchy-feely,
Right. Self-care, I think self-care is, it can be, I think people go, oh, take a bath, go for a walk, get your nails done. And yes, shower. That's basic level of just self-care. But really what self-care is,
personal hygiene.
Right. It's looking at you as an individual and what is it that you need to feel rejuvenated, to feel like your cup is being filled and to feel like you can get that energy going again, right? And that might be hide away and take some time, take a bath. It might be get out and spend time with people and socialize. I think when we're talking about ministry work and working in the church, working with people, one of the things to think about is our spiritual self. When you're giving continuously to people all day and you're stopping to do the admin stuff or the tasks and, you're pouring out and helping to pour into people spiritually, you don't go, okay, well, let me stop and refill my cup, right? And if it's not built into the dynamics of the work environment, you can become drained spiritually and not feel fulfilled very quickly. Because when you're working in a church, you work in the church. Sunday is a work day. You're going And you may be getting something from that, but it is a work day. There's like the logistics of running things that need to happen. And so when I talk about, preventing burnout in church work or in ministry work, like I really think about spiritually making sure that you're fulfilling your needs. And that's being met. And that's something that as an individual, you can take your own accountability towards, right? Like, what does that look like? What do you need? How do you get that? But also from a leadership or management perspective, like making sure that you are creating spaces for your staff and employees to be able to be filled up. Like you have the ministry there. This is the system that you're working with them, but how are we pouring into our employees in a way that helps prevent burnout, right?
A few things I jotted down here. I mean, this is a very unique position, a very unique situation, which is very different. A lot of times when you and I are talking to groups, organizations, individuals about burnout, we're talking about a more traditional, say, business environment, and so when a person finishes the workday, they go home. And in some sense, when you are a church worker, you don't get to go home. And so let's say you're a pastor of a church, and now, not only is this where you work, but this is also where your family goes to church. Your family is part of this congregation, and you may be in a small group with other congregants, and you may be in a men's Bible study with other men in the church. And there's never an opportunity for you to kind of get the junk off your shoulders. You can't really talk about, hey, this one guy has just been driving me insane. He comes in with, or I'm so overwhelmed. There's so many, my wife and I aren't getting along because, faith communities hold pastors and ministry staff to kind of unrealistic expectations. The thought is they have no problems and they have unlimited capacity to give and give and give and never burn out. And that's just not true. So it's a very unique situation. And I think, we a lot of times we'll talk about having support and things like that. But in the environment that you're in, it makes it very, very difficult for an individual to share as a minister or a ministry staff that they're burning out, that they are not happy with what's going on, that they're being kind of emptied out and they can't get filled again.
Well, it's similar when you think about like the for-profit world, right? Like you have executives and CEOs that when you don't have that kind of camaraderie or area to kind of sit and say, this is what's happening because you're leading it and everyone's looking to you for, so that's essentially what you're talking about is happening. And
you do get to go home and you can,
check out from
you
that
can
a little bit.
You can go you can go talk to a CEO from another company, or you could talk to a friend that works.
Or you can go to your church and talk to your pastor.
Go to your church, right? Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it's a real, it's a real unique kind of a situation. And again, we're holding these individuals to unrealistic expectations. I do think that, I think first and foremost, and I hate to say this, it's kind of just to kind of echo a little bit what you said. You do have to start first with recognizing the issues that you yourself are having. Like if you have to say, well, this stresses me out, or this doesn't stress me out, or, you have to set up appropriate boundaries, which you probably need to talk about a little bit more. And I think that, I would say starting there is probably one of the biggest problems I see with ministry staff is absolutely not setting up boundaries. And I'll just give you a perfect example of a boundary I set up. Now, we run a ministry, but people don't think about us that way. They think about us as, mental health professionals and things like that. But people will constantly give out my cell phone number to people that they meet that are having problems. And I say that, it's like people that have my cell phone number, like people on the board and things like that.
Yeah.
And, just the other day, I got a phone call at 5:30 at night when I was literally walking across the living room to go sit down and have dinner with my family, 5:30 on a Thursday evening, that a guy said that a person in one of the addiction groups had given him my phone number and told him to call me, that I could help him. And that's just a boundary that I've set up over the last couple of years. I used to not have that boundary, but I said, hey, I would be happy to help you, but I'm at home right now. And this is my cell phone that you just called, and I'm sitting down to eat dinner. So if you could call me tomorrow, this is my office number. I will be happy to help you in any way that I can.
I'm gonna claim some of responsibility for that, because I used to give you so much slack for taking those calls. And I would say, don't give my cell phone number out because I'm not going to do what you.
Well, I've spent entire weekends. If someone calls me
Right.
on a Saturday morning that they're in ER with their family and they need to get a bed for their daughter who's having a psychotic break or something, and you want to help them. And I use that example
Yeah.
because it's a simple example. So, and it really has to be a case by case. If somebody called me
Absolutely.
and said, my son is suicidal and I need help, I'm going to help them. I don't care what's
You're not going to
on.
say, I'm in the middle of dinner.
Right,
Please
I'm
call
eating,
tomorrow.
okay, so,
Right.
but when it's not an emergency, you have to set those boundaries, and I think pastors are particularly bad at it
Yes.
because I think that they are perceived as saying, well, it's kind of the old cliche goes, well, the Lord's work is never done, and so if somebody calls me at 8:00 at night, then I'm the pastor, I need to talk to them. Well, yes, I mean, if someone calls you 8:00 at night and it's an emergency, you probably do need to talk to them. But you need to set some appropriate boundaries for that. And you need to make sure that your staff sets appropriate boundaries for themselves as well, because burnout's a real thing.
Absolutely.
If there is no break from your job, now I would say there's no, again, we can get into a lot of definitions here. There is no break from ministry. We're ministers of the Lord 24/7, regardless of whether we're in vocational ministry or not. But the reality is if somebody calls and says, I need to talk to you because my wife and I aren't getting along, and it's 8:00 at night on a Wednesday, they can wait till tomorrow. And that's okay.
Right.
Because you need to spend time with your family.
Rest is just so important. And I think you and I, doing what we do, being in our role, we are go, 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 right? As many people in the world are. It's just such a high-paced world. And like you said, ministry's not a 9 to 5 kind of life. But you cannot continue to, what do they say? Light the fire both ends.
Burn the candle on both
Burn the
ends.
candle.
No, that's exactly right. No,
Yeah.
that's right.
So a rest is so important. I mean, not just sleeping. I don't mean getting your 8 hours of sleep, like resting, like sitting down and doing nothing or spending time with people and it not being, this big event.
Well, that's a real good point you just made there. I hope people heard that. Just going home and going to bed is not just rest. That's not what you mean when you say rest.
Correct.
And I'll actually follow that up with a Bible verse. This is I find this to be a very particularly interesting verse. First off, in the Gospels, many times Jesus himself gets away from everybody and gets away from his disciples to go and rest and to pray and to be alone because he's just overwhelmed by all the people coming. And this verse in Mark 6, I find particularly interesting because it's Jesus looking out for the disciples because the same thing's happening to them. And Mark 6:31 says, then because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat, he said to them, it's Jesus said to the disciples, come with me by yourself to a quiet place and get some rest. So, I mean, if Jesus is encouraging his own disciples to get away from the crowds, to stop ministry for a period of time so that they can rest, they're not even able to eat. And I'm sure there are pastors that are listening that they get that. They just, go, 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 go. Well, then it is appropriate. It's okay. And as a neuroscientist, let me just talk to you about this from a biological perspective. What happens as you begin to get fatigued, as you mentioned, and you're getting mentally fatigued and physically fatigued and spiritually fatigued, and your body begins to kind of go into kind of a stress response is what happens. And so you're pumping out all this cortisol, these stress hormones, and you are, your heart's beating faster. You're having a stress response, and you're not going to be able to get out of that until you actually go and kind of deal with the anxiety or stress of the situation and truly rest. And so you're now becoming very physically unhealthy as a result of the stress that's occurring as a result of you burning out. And so you're more prone to cardiac problems. You're more prone to sickness and illness because your immune system's compromised. I mean, it's just a horrible kind of self-fulfilling kind of doom prophecy here. It's only going to get worse. And then after a while, the joy that comes from helping people, you don't have it anymore. You actually kind of don't like the people that you're helping. You start to
You start to
resent
feel
it.
resentful. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so, I think there's a lot of physical things going on here. It's not just like, oh, I just need to kind of suck it up or I need to pray more and, God will give me strength. And sure, you need to pray more and God will provide you the strength in times of need, but you need to take care of yourself. And, that Mark 6 verse, if Jesus is trying to take care of his disciples and saying,
Right.
hey, stop and let's go away and eat and rest, well, then I think it's okay for you to set up some boundaries.
It's Christ-like to do that,
Very much
to
so.
set up boundaries and take care of yourself. Yeah, I was getting a little bit of flashbacks when you're talking about the physiological response that's happening. I was thinking about, as I was working full time, here at the center and doing my PhD full time, and at one point thought that I physically was going to die. I'm being a little dramatic there, but I mean, there would be days, and you can attest to this, I'd show up at work and people would be like, what's wrong with you? And I'm like, oh, I haven't slept and I'm dying. Like my heart rate would start to, like, I couldn't get my body to relax because I was just go, 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 go mode and, pushing it to the limits. And I don't know if I got to the point of burnout, but here's the hard part with it is I knew that I was pushing myself because of what I was doing. I had added a whole school system into my I added school to my plate, right? But oftentimes people don't realize that they're working towards burnout until they've hit burnout. I mean, and that's kind of the problem is people are not aware of what they're experiencing. They might be, oh, this is a season of stress, or oh, this is a season of blah, 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 blah. I just have to keep going. I have to keep pushing through it. And at what point do you say, no, I need to pause and rest and attend to myself and my family so I don't hit burnout? I mean, I personally think having a weekly point where you're resting is, if you're in a high season in life where you've got a lot going on, like intentionally scheduling some time, some downtime, and really valuing that and respecting those boundaries and saying, this is a time that I'm spending with family or going to sit down and do whatever it is that kind of rejuvenates me. And it really can help prevent burnout, because what happens is we don't realize we're working towards burnout until we've hit it. And it's kind of too late.
No, I think it's a good point. I think you have to be very intentional. And when you're burned out, it's too late. It's like, yes, now you need to take care of that, but you're in a bad state at that point. In fact, once you've reached burnout, you're at risk of really the only way of you being able to successfully kind of return to a normal level of functioning may be that you have to leave the position that you were in. It just depends on how badly burned out you are and what's going on. You're also going to start to see relationships around you start to fall apart and all types of things, all the physical issues that go. So you have to be very intentional, and you have to work on coping and boundaries and rest and all those things before you burn out to keep, like you said prevent. And that's what it's all about. It's about preventing burnout, not trying to treat burnout once it's happened. And when I say being intentional, I mean, you literally have to put this into the schedule of your daily life.
Right.
I used to always kind of think about people that have jobs where there is a requirement for them having a certain number of breaks. I've had friends that had those jobs because the job, like they work X number of hours. And so because of some agreement with the company, then they get X number of 15-minute breaks. And it isn't always when they want to take a break. It's just like, okay, you have to take 15 minutes
now
break
you're
right
taking
now,
a break,
right this minute.
Well, even like pilots, they have limitations on how much they're allowed to fly.
It's a great idea, but it isn't built in a way usually where people are able to use it effectively. They just kind of like, okay, that's it, and so, and that's what the ministry staff needs to do. They need to say, okay, do I need to have a break during the day? What does that look like? What am I going to do? Do I need to exercise regularly? Well, I need to work that into my life. And so that just becomes part of your daily life, and self-care and using appropriate coping strategies and setting up appropriate boundaries are just part of how you live. You don't sometimes say, okay, I know you're calling me at 9:00 at night, and yes, I'll talk to you now about whatever it is. But next time, oh no, I have to be, no, you set the boundaries up, and that's just how you live. Same thing with what are your coping strategies? No, I do a lot of talks on stress, and I know you do that too. And obviously, when we're talking about burnout, we're talking about stress to some extent. But, I really encourage everyone to sit down and ask yourself, when I get stressed out, when I have a bad, stressful day, when I have a bad, stressful moment, event, whatever it may be, what is it that I do to make myself feel better? Because usually what it is you do to make yourself feel better are your coping strategies. So do you go and eat a gallon of Bluebell ice cream? Do you go shopping? Do you go for a run? There are healthy things to do and unhealthy things. Probably the most
What if
unhealthy.
I did all three of those just in a
right.
row? Went shopping, ate some ice cream, and then went for a
And
run.
there are people that do that. And, probably the most unhealthy would be, you go and you drink.
Right.
And so I think that you have to figure out what your coping strategies are before you can make a determination on how you're going to make them healthy or determine if they are healthy. And you have to make sure you're using them. If what you do when you get stressed out is you exercise, but you never make time for yourself to go exercise, well, that's never going to work. That's just never going to work.
Sure. Yeah. If spending time with family is important, and you're too busy to schedule time to go spend with them, then it's not actually going to fulfill you the way that you need it to.
Certainly spiritual practices, are also coping strategies. Perhaps you pray, perhaps you worship, you listen to worship music, you read the Bible, whatever, but you have to make time for that. And, what I find a lot of times when I work with ministry staff is they'll say, oh, well, I read the Bible throughout the day. It's just part of my job and it really helps me. Again, you got to be very intentional. You have to have some separation from the ministry work of the day, which is, for the right or the wrong of it, it is a job that you have.
Right.
And then you have to take a break from that. You have to be able to kind of let the steam out.
So up until this point, we've talked about if you're working in a church or in some sort of ministry, what you can do as the individual to support yourself to prevent burnout. But I wonder, what are the expectations on the organization or the church or leadership to help foster an environment that doesn't continually drive people over and over again towards burnout? Do you have any thoughts?
Absolutely. And I think it's a very important point that you just made. I think because, churches are hiring people all the time and they hire pastors all the time. And I think the first thing, which is the easiest to think of, is you have to understand, as a ministry organization, do you have opportunities for your employees, because they are employees, to take time off? Can they take time off? Do you provide time off? I know that's the most basic of anything. And then I think you need to make sure that they're taking some time off. If you
don't feel guilty about it.
Right. If you say, oh yeah, we have a very liberal vacation policy, you get 2 weeks every year, blah, blah, but then you don't allow them really to take off because they're never given an opportunity. There's no opportunity for anyone to fill the space when they leave. But I also think encouraging people to do the kind of things we've been talking about, setting up boundaries. I think churches can be very helpful with that. Let's say you're at a church where they have elected board members and they help run the church. You have your ministry staff, but they kind of help make the decisions. And you're on that board and you're calling the pastor at 9:00 at night on a Saturday because you need to know what he's thinking about getting the parking lot paved. Well, then you're part of the problem.
Right.
You have to make sure, as the leadership of that church, that you're looking out for those people that God has called to work there. You need to model that effectively. And so you need to make sure that those boundaries are in place. And I think you need to encourage the ministry staff to set up boundaries. And I also don't think it's a bad idea to offer them opportunities to engage a mental health therapist so that they can talk through things they might have or problems and encourage them and make them recognize that that's not some kind of weakness. That's just trying to make yourself stronger and more healthy for better ministry.
I think from a logistical standpoint, there's a few things that leadership or management could implement, and people want to volunteer at churches. We have people calling here all the time wanting to volunteer. So utilizing that, utilizing the volunteers to do some of the things that they can, which takes some of the burden off of the ministry staff. Or if you don't have this large budget where you can have multiple people, paid positions doing all of these things, utilize volunteers it may be a little less organized, it may be a little more chaotic, and things don't need to be perfect, right? Like not everything has to be perfect. I think that's one huge way that you can, even if it's just for certain events, release the burden on the employees that you have, but also taking time to celebrate your team. I know for me personally, I will go, okay, I finished this, on to the next. That's great. I did it. Wonderful. And I mean, it's like, great. I have a Ph.D. Did that. Let's move on to the next thing. And I tend to not celebrate successes. And if I weren't aware of that, it might translate down into my team that I'm not celebrating some of the things that they do. And I'm not the best at that. But being able to celebrate your team and the accomplishments, and that doesn't mean every day you're overly congratulatory towards people, but taking time 2-3 times a year to sit down and celebrate. What are some of the successes that we've had as a team? What are some of the successes that individuals have had throughout the year? And really kind of highlighting that and refocusing on that. And some of the research shows that people are less likely to experience burnout when they feel job satisfaction, which means they feel they enjoy the work that they do, but there's also some level of autonomy in their work. So they come to work and they're not being micromanaged. It's not, this is specifically how you need to have this task done. And in our kind of line of work, oftentimes there's not specific ways things need to be done. It's not engineering or science, things like that, hard science at least. So allowing people to make decisions that you might do it differently had you been the one to put out that product or roll out that event. But allowing people to have some autonomy in their work really does increase satisfaction because they get to come and kind of use their brain and they feel like they're involved and they're contributing. And that really does help prevent burnout as well. So outside of just caring for yourself, there's a lot of things like infrastructurally that can be done to help prevent burnout in the workplace.
And I think you make a good point there. I think that ministry staff, particularly pastors and kind of upper leadership in faith communities, they really need to make this a congregational event, everything, so you're getting others involved. You don't have to try to do everything yourself, but you make a very good point when you say, but when you delegate to others, you may give them some guidelines and you have to be okay with them not doing it exactly like. And I will just tell you that not being able to delegate and insisting on it always being done in a particular way, and then you ultimately just doing everything yourself is just an absolute guaranteed burnout situation. Yeah. And so, I mean, it's just going to happen. You may be really satisfied with the way things are going for a while, but it's just absolutely going to happen. And what I've seen in working with literally hundreds and hundreds of churches over the years and people in the mission field and things like that is what happens is when ministry staff and even people that just work in non-ministry positions start to think, oh, you know what? This job is not as satisfying to me as it used to be. So I think it might be time for me to move. It might be time for me to move on to something else. And that's how they're going to fix what they don't recognize as burnout. They think, well, maybe God is calling me to another position, or I've been in this job for 10 years, maybe it's time for me to move to another company if you're in the general. Right. And so for those people that are in leadership in faith communities, this is also a retention issue. You're going to keep your staff. Not only are they going to do a better job, but they're going to be with you longer because they're not going to get that weird feeling like, well, this job doesn't satisfy me anymore, when really what it is, and certainly people wake up some days and go, you know what, my job doesn't satisfy me. That happens. But really, a lot of times when people start to burn out, they start to think, I don't really enjoy this anymore, so it must be time for me to move on. Well, why are you not enjoying it? And I will also tell you, you mentioned infrastructure issues. Whenever you look at equations for burnout, along with long hours, the lack of support from the establishment itself is one of the, classics. So, and this is where you get people in social service, like you who are a social worker at one time, and my daughter who's a social worker. You're given these impossible scenarios from every single person you work with, and then you're supposed to help them. But then the system that you're working with oftentimes feels like it's actually fighting against you.
Working against you.
Yeah. To actually, we can't do that. We can't do that. We don't have that. And so I think that's, again, part of the problem with ministry staff is they are given constantly everything from just very simple things like I need to learn how to pray better to my family's falling apart or my mother died or whatever. And a lot of times they just don't feel like they have the resources or the support to help these individuals. And I think that's another thing a church can do, and is that they can have congregants and other ministry staff working on making sure resources and supports and process are in place so that everybody knows what they can do and what they can't do and where they go to get these types of things. It's just going to make burnout that much less likely because you're going to feel like you're more effective at doing what you're doing. So.
Yeah. I mean, we see that a lot, right? Is in helping professions and ministry work, you want to do everything. You want to, like someone says, oh, I need this. You want to just be able to do it. But the reality is you need to be aware of what your role is. And when I'm talking about like a volunteer or a paid employee, what is your role? And I don't mean as a Christian. I don't mean as someone who's working in a church. What is your actual role? What tasks and responsibilities should you be responsible for? And if something comes across your desk, that is not yours, that you need to find whose it should be and pass it along to them, right? So people are, quote unquote, staying in their lane will help prevent burnout, because when even if you can do it all, which a lot of people in this work can, that's why they like it, but it leads to, okay, well, I can do this real quick, but I still have all my other things that I need to do. And that's how you are working late and working into the weekends. And so really, really being able to take a step out of yourself and say, where am I in this infrastructure? Or where's my employee as a leader in this infrastructure? What are they doing that they should be doing? And what are they doing that we need to assign, or reestablish those roles and responsibilities? Because oftentimes people, they want to help, they want to be able to offer. And if gone unchecked, it can really become detrimental to.
Yeah. And to kind of wrap up, we'll just kind of build off of that. I mean, this is we don't want to, and I've mentioned a couple of times, we don't want to ignore that this is a very unique type of work, being involved in vocational ministry, of working within a church setting, which is what we're primarily talking about. Although this thing certainly could be taken into account for people who are volunteering within, as you said, within this setting. So there has to be kind of a very kind of intentional separation of what it is to be, what it is in what part of my job is ministry, and what parts of my life as a believer are ministry, because there's some separation between them a pastor or a ministry staff might say, well, like you just said, someone's come and they've brought this to me and they want me to help them. But that really is another person's job within our ministry. Well, am I a bad Christian if I don't help them? Because if I'm just a guy out on the street and they came up to me, I would probably help them. You see what I'm saying? So
absolutely not. Yeah, but we see that all the time. And what I tell my team here is, if you are not the right person to help that person, you are potentially doing them a disservice or harming them.
Right.
Because if someone calls up here and is looking for something that we don't do, and we continue to engage with them, kind of wanting to help, but they might start to think, oh, well, they're doing these things for me, when really we're not. We need to be redirecting them to the appropriate person. But we think that we're helping, but really we're preventing them from getting to the support that they need. So yeah, absolutely, that happens often, and it's with good intentions, right?
Right. Another part of that, I think, is in this uniqueness of ministry, is this idea of availability. And if we're all living as a family, we're the family of God, we're all citizens of heaven, we're all caring for one another and walking along with one another. If I tell you that I have a problem and you're in vocational ministry, my expectation is that you're going to help me. And if you then say, hey, you know what, this is absolutely a problem, but this is actually Jim's role in our ministry, I'm going to pass you over to him. I have seen people get very upset at that. And I think, now at this moment, I'm talking to the congregants out there. And that is, you need to be very protective of your ministry staff. You need to understand that they can't do everything, and no one individual is going to be able to satisfy you in every way. And so, if they have a process in place and they have roles assigned and job duties and things like that, you need to be okay with being given over to someone else who that's really their job. Like you just said, you need to not then go and barbecue the pastor to the rest of the congregants. Oh, I emailed, Pastor Jim, and he just sent me over to this other guy, and he doesn't even. You have to understand that it isn't that he didn't care for you. In fact, he did care for you. He moved you to the person that was most appropriate.
Right.
That helped
Right.
you. And I think that we have to be really, really protective, and we need to not hold them at standards that are unrealistic. And I think that will help as well. We need to let them know that it's okay for them, as the Mark 6 verse says, to get away, have something to eat, and rest. It's okay to not be ministering 24 hours a day.
Absolutely. I think that's a good potential other episode of the podcast is talking about what boundaries are pretty specifically, because we talk about them in very vague terms. People say, oh, set these boundaries, set your boundaries, hold your boundaries. Well, what does that mean? And what you said something that made me think. How do people respond to boundaries when they're being set, especially when you're newly implementing them? I think that'd be an interesting conversation that we won't delve into today, but I think might be a good conversation for a later episode. So thanks for joining our conversation on this episode of the Madness and Grace podcast. If you found value in our discussion today, we'd love it if you'd subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode.
And if you enjoyed what you heard, please consider leaving us a rating and review. It helps others find these important conversations.
Sharing this podcast with friends and family members is also a wonderful way to extend hope to those who might be struggling with mental health concerns.
We'll be back next time with another candid conversation about madness and grace. See you then.